On a winter evening, when the scent of spice drifts through kitchens across the world, few pause to wonder why a simple cookie shaped like a running little person feels so familiar. The gingerbread man, with his stubby limbs and sly smile, is usually thought of as a quaint Christmas treat, a bit of sugary nostalgia. Yet hidden inside that smiling shape is a lineage older than the pyramids, older than the great myths of Greece and Rome. According to legend, this humble figure carries a secret that began 3,000 years ago, when bread, ritual, and storytelling were inseparable. Imagine a time before printed stories or streaming shows, when tales were eaten as well as told. In villages scattered across Europe and the Near East, bakers needed not only flour and honey but meaning. They shaped dough into animals, ancestors, and spirits, then baked them with spices that arrived along the earliest trade routes. These edible effigies were not a novelty. They were offerings, charms, and teaching tools. Children learned myths by biting into them. Adults sealed promises over them. Travelers carried them across mountains as portable shrines. By the time the first written recipe for gingerbread appears in medieval manuscripts, the practice had already been ancient for centuries. There is a story whispered in folklore archives of an early festival in which people shaped dough into running figures to honor a seasonal spirit that must never be caught. This spirit, like the crops themselves, had to flee winter's grasp to return in spring. "Catch me if you can," the baked effigy seemed to say, echoing a ritual chase acted out by villagers. The line between myth and pastry blurred. What we call a cookie today was once a small myth you could hold in your hand. According to food historians, the word gingerbread originally meant preserved ginger, not a biscuit. It was medicine, luxury, and magic rolled into one. Ginger was prized not just for its warmth but for its protective aura. Medieval Europeans believed it could ward off illness and even evil spirits. Mixing ginger into dough shaped like humans or animals created, in their eyes, a double layer of protection, a spice charm baked into a body. Some regions added gold leaf to the figures. Others pressed the dough into carved wooden molds depicting saints or folk heroes. Each variation carried a local story, but all shared the same core idea. The shape mattered, and so did the spice. If you close your eyes and trace this tradition backward, you pass through bustling Renaissance fairs, medieval markets, Roman spice stalls, and even further, to Bronze Age ceremonies where honey cakes took the shape of gods. In Egypt, small bread figures were placed in tombs. In Greece, myth breads called plakis carried stories of Demeter and Persephone. In China, mooncakes hid legends under their crust. Across cultures, edible symbols became a way to make the invisible visible, the sacred tangible. The gingerbread man is one survivor of this global impulse. But what made this particular figure, the little person who runs, so enduring? Anthropologists point to a universal archetype: the trickster who escapes, the life force that refuses to be contained. In myths from West Africa to Scandinavia, characters who outwit capture represent vitality, luck, and the promise of renewal. When such an archetype is baked into bread, it becomes a ritual you can enact. Break the cookie, eat the spirit, internalize its power. Even when the ritual meaning fades, the shape remains, like a fossil of belief. By the late Middle Ages, European gingerbread fairs were enormous events. Bakers competed to produce ever more elaborate shapes: knights, ladies, animals, coats of arms. But the running human persisted as a crowd favorite. In Nuremberg, considered the gingerbread capital of the world, guilds of Lebkuchen bakers guarded their spice blends as trade secrets. In England, gingerbread men appeared at royal banquets. Queen Elizabeth I reportedly had cookies made to resemble visiting dignitaries, a playful gesture with roots in much older practices of making edible effigies of allies or gods. As the story migrated into print, a new version emerged. In 19th century Europe and America, children's books began featuring a gingerbread boy who runs away from his makers, pursued by animals and people, only to be eaten at last by a fox. This tale, first published in a Massachusetts newspaper in 1875, is often cited as the origin of the character we know today. But its plot echoes far older folk tales about runaway pancakes and trickster loaves found across Scandinavia, Germany, and Russia. The cookie story is not an invention but a retelling, the latest verse of an ancient refrain. According to one scholar of folklore, the rhythm of that refrain, The chase, the boast, the inevitable catch, is a micromyth of life itself. We are born, we flee danger, we brag about our speed, and in the end we are consumed by time. But the gingerbread man offers a sweeter version of this truth. He is caught not by wolves but by a clever fox, and he returns to the community as food, completing a cycle of sharing rather than fear. In this light, even the children's story preserves a ritual echo. The cookie escapes so that you may eat it, taking its energy inside you. Today, when you pick up a gingerbread cookie at a holiday market, you're holding more than sugar and spice. You're touching a fragment of a 3,000-year-old conversation between myth and meal. The smiling figure in your hand is a messenger from a time when food was a storybook, a temple, and a charm all at once. Its secret is not hidden in a recipe but in a ritual that has been quietly migrating through cultures and centuries. In this documentary, we'll follow that migration. We'll journey from ancient ovens to medieval fairs, from the spice caravans of the Silk Road to the kitchens of modern homes. We'll meet the archetypes behind the cookie, the traders who carried its ingredients, the villagers who acted out its myths. We'll see how a humble biscuit became a living fossil of human imagination, surviving empire, religion, and industrialization without losing its smile. As we peel back these layers, one question will guide us. What does it mean that a simple-shaped cookie can outlast kings and kingdoms, faiths and fashions? Perhaps by the end, the gingerbread man's secret will turn out to be our own, the enduring hunger for stories we can taste. To understand why a small, spiced figure could travel so far across time, we have to step back into the landscapes that gave birth to it. Picture the world 3 millennia ago. Empires were rising and falling across the Near East and Mediterranean. Trade routes snaked from India to Egypt, from Arabia to the Black Sea, carrying not only goods but ideas, rituals, and recipes. Long before Europe's medieval fairs, spiced breads were already playing their quiet role in ceremonies of fertility, harvest, and protection. Archaeologists in Anatolia have uncovered clay molds shaped like humans and animals dating back to the Late Bronze Age. These weren't toys. They were templates for bread and cakes baked for seasonal rites. In Mesopotamia, temple scribes recorded offerings of honey cakes shaped like gods, placed on altars during festivals. In Egypt, bread effigies were buried with the dead to nourish them in the afterlife. The shapes varied: fish, birds, serpents, women dancing, but the logic was consistent. You formed a symbol out of dough to invite its power or to please the deity it represented. Across the Mediterranean, Greece and Rome inherited this practice. The Greek placus and Roman libum were not plain loaves but ritual cakes, often spiced with imported herbs and decorated with symbols. In some regions, bakers pressed dough into molds carved with mythic scenes. These were eaten at festivals or given as votive offerings. Children learned myths by recognizing the shapes: a loaf shaped like a sheaf of wheat for Demeter, a coiled snake for Asclepius, a winged horse for a local hero. To eat one was to participate in the story. Spices played a crucial role. Ginger, cinnamon, and cloves were exotic imports. They traveled along the same caravan routes as silk and precious stones. Because they were costly, they carried an aura of power. In many cultures, spiced food was considered warming, protective, and even aphrodisiac. Combining a human shape with a protective spice multiplied its significance. According to some medieval medical texts, ginger cheereth the heart and driveth away evil vapors. For ordinary people, it was like baking a charm into bread. Northern Europe developed its own variations. In Scandinavia, scholars have found references to peppercaker, pepper cakes, offered at midwinter festivals centuries before Christianity. These cakes were sometimes shaped like little men, goats, or protective runes. The shapes were connected to the Yule traditions of warding off darkness and inviting fertility for the coming year. In the Baltic and Slavic regions, people baked honey cakes shaped like animals to protect livestock or ensure good harvests. Though each culture had its own pantheon, the habit of giving form to dough was nearly universal. By the time Christianity spread across Europe, the Church found these practices too deeply rooted to ban. Instead, many were absorbed and reinterpreted. Saints replaced old gods. Feast days replaced seasonal festivals. Edible effigies continued, now blessed or stamped with crosses. Gingerbread, as we would recognize it, appeared at monasteries and pilgrimage sites. Monks recorded recipes for spiced honey cakes and pressed them into molds of saints or sacred symbols to sell to travelers. Buying and eating one was both a treat and a token of devotion. One of the earliest documented gingerbread guilds arose in 15th century Germany. These bakers inherited a tradition already layered with centuries of meaning. They made Lebkuchen, rich, spiced cakes, for fairs and holy days, pressing them into wooden molds with intricate carvings. Some molds depicted entire biblical scenes, others heraldic emblems. Alongside these grand designs persisted the simple running man, a shape that seemed to belong to no single saint or story but to something older, a folk memory of the elusive spirit who must be chased but never caught. This blend of ritual, trade, and storytelling created a fertile ground for myths to travel. The idea of a runaway loaf or cake appears in folktales from Russia, the Kolobok, Norway, the pancake boy, and Germany, der Fliegenkuchen. In each, a small baked being escapes from its makers and rolls or runs away, meeting various characters before its inevitable end. The stories may have been told to children during baking days, or as playful warnings about greed and disobedience. But they also echo an archetypal pattern of life force, escape, and return. The same pattern enacted in seasonal rituals. Even the man part of the gingerbread man may not have been literal at first. Early shapes included women, children, animals, and spirits. Over time, the running human became a default. It was easy to cut, easy to decorate, and symbolically flexible. Depending on the festival, it could represent a saint, a harvest spirit, a loved one, or simply the one who gets away. In some towns, couples exchanged gingerbread figures at betrothals, believing the spice and shape would ensure a sweet and fertile union. In others, soldiers carried them as charms. Meanwhile, the spread of sugar transformed these traditions. By the late medieval period, sugar was replacing honey in many recipes, making gingerbread lighter and easier to shape. Decorative icing allowed bakers to give their figures faces, clothes, and expressions. What had once been a charm now looked like a character. Children could identify with it. Adults could laugh at it. The myth moved from ritual to entertainment without losing its basic outline. According to culinary historians, the combination of a spiced dough, a human shape, and a tale of escape is one of the longest-running threads in European folk culture. It connects Bronze Age altars to modern cookie cutters, reminding us that food is one of the most durable carriers of story. You can ban a festival, rewrite a myth, or burn a manuscript, but as long as people bake and eat together, the shape endures. When we speak of a 3,000-year-old secret, it isn't a conspiracy or a hidden recipe. It's a continuity of practice, shaping dough into beings, imbuing them with story, and sharing them across generations. The gingerbread man is the most visible remnant of that continuity. His smile is a fossil smile, his run a ritual run, his spices a whisper of ancient trade winds. Standing in a modern kitchen with a bag of flour and a jar of ginger, you're reenacting a ritual older than your surname. You're tracing a line from Mesopotamian temple kitchens to medieval guild halls to your own holiday table. Every time a child decorates a gingerbread man, they're unknowingly participating in a global tradition of edible mythology, a tradition that began when bread was more than food, when stories were something you could taste. If we peel back the layers of icing and look at the deeper history, the earliest versions of the gingerbread man are not found in cookbooks but in stories and rituals that predate writing itself. Scholars who study foodways, the intersection of cuisine and culture, point out that recipes are latecomers. For centuries, these traditions were transmitted orally, by hands kneading dough and mouths reciting tales. You learned both at once, the formula for the bread and the story it embodied. In the folktale catalogs of Europe, one of the oldest motifs is the runaway food story. In Russian villages it is the kolobok, a small round bun baked by an old couple. After cooling on the windowsill it rolls away, meeting animals and boasting of its speed before a fox eats it. In Norway there is the pannekake, a pancake with the same fate. In Germany, children once told stories of a little cake called der Fliegenkuchen, the flying cake that escaped the oven. Each culture gives it a local name and twist, but the pattern is the same. A piece of food, shaped like life, defies its creators, travels through the world, and meets a clever predator. Why such a story? Anthropologists see it as a playful dramatization of two universal experiences: The first is the mystery of life emerging from inert matter, dough rising, bread living. The second is the inevitability of return, food returning to mouths, life returning to the earth. In telling these tales, communities gave children a safe way to rehearse ideas about temptation, consequences, and the cycle of giving and taking. In baking the shapes themselves, they enacted the same lesson with their hands. But these motifs go back even further. In Sumerian hymns from the 3rd millennium BCE, we find references to divine bread shaped like beings. In one festival of the goddess Inanna, worshippers prepared honey cakes molded as servants and animals to accompany her into the underworld. The cakes were eaten after the ceremony, symbolizing the goddess's return, and the participants shared renewal. In Egypt, miniature loaves called ashabti bread were shaped like workers or deities and placed in tombs as sustenance for the dead. Some of these loaves were spiced with imported aromatics from Arabia, precursors to the ginger we know today. Even the ginger plant itself has a mythic path. Originating in Southeast Asia, it traveled west along the spice routes for millennia. In India, it flavored sacred offerings and Ayurvedic tonics. In China, it was both food and medicine, recorded in early pharmacopoeias as warming the blood and expelling cold spirits. By the time it reached the Middle East and Europe, ginger already carried an aura of healing and magic. To combine it with a shaped bread was to merge two streams of tradition, the edible effigy and the protective spice. Wooden molds offer another window into these origins. The oldest surviving gingerbread molds, kept in museums in Germany, Poland, and the Netherlands, are not cute at all. They depict wild beasts, dragons, kings, pilgrims, and mythic hybrids. Some show scenes of combat or courtship. Others frame a single running figure surrounded by symbols, sunbursts, vines, or protective knots. These molds were carved with skill and passed down like heirlooms. A family might own just one, using it for generations to mark births, weddings, or seasonal feasts. According to one 16th-century German chronicle, bakers at Nuremberg's winter fair offered honey cakes in the likeness of men, beasts, and spirits, some as tall as a child. Buyers took them home to display until spring, nibbling them little by little. Children might start with the limbs, saving the head for last. The act of eating the figure gradually was not just about prolonging the treat. It mirrored the fading of winter, the breaking down of old year into the new. Though few wrote down these meanings, the ritual spoke through repetition. Another thread in the origin story involves masquerade and disguise. In some alpine regions, villagers wore gingerbread figures on their hats or pinned to their clothes during midwinter parades. The edible charms identified their role in the procession: hunter, maiden, spirit. After the parade, the figures were eaten or exchanged. This practice blurs the line between costume and cookie, making the gingerbread man not just a snack but a temporary identity. When later children's tales described the cookie boasting and running away, they were echoing a real performance tradition where the effigy was alive for a time. One might think that the 19th century American newspaper story about the gingerbread boy invented the character. In reality, it codified a European pattern. The 1875 Springfield, Massachusetts story begins with a little old woman baking a gingerbread boy. When she opens the oven, he leaps out and runs, chanting, "Run, run as fast as you can." He outruns various pursuers until a fox tricks him. This is almost line for line the same as the older Kolobok story, with only the food type changed. The American version gave it a distinctive cadence and a name, the Gingerbread Man, but the myth behind it was already ancient. Food historians sometimes call this a case of culinary folklore migration. A motif moves from one food to another, from one festival to another, but keeps its structure. Over time, the ritual context fades and a children's story remains. We see the same with other edible myths: hot cross buns, mooncakes, king cakes at Epiphany. The gingerbread man is simply one of the most portable examples. Because his base ingredients were long-lasting and his shape easy to cut, he traveled well. Yet there's another, subtler origin: the human need to personify what we can't control. Grain, for ancient farmers, was life itself. Losing it meant hunger. Saving it meant survival. By shaping bread into beings who run away or return, people externalized their anxiety and hope. They could laugh at the runaway loaf, chase it in play, and then eat it, turning the cycle into something communal and comforting. In this sense, the gingerbread man is not just a mythic relic but a psychological tool, a way of giving form to the fleeting, making impermanence sweet. Today, when you watch a child decorate a gingerbread man with icing eyes and buttons, you're seeing a distant echo of this origin story. The child is making the figure personal, giving it life before eating it. The act is playful but ancient. It rehearses, in miniature, the same cycle of creation, escape, and return that has traveled from Sumerian altars to Scandinavian kitchens to American holiday tables. This is the secret hidden under the cookie's smile. He's not just a whimsical snack but the last survivor of a ritual language older than writing. Each bite carries a story of trade winds, temple kitchens, village fairs, and human imagination. Each running leg is a footstep across centuries. And each retelling, whether as a tale, a cookie, or a festival, renews the bond between food and myth. Behind every enduring legend stands not only a single character but a family of archetypes. The gingerbread man is no exception. His smiling face and sprinting limbs may look simple, but they carry echoes of tricksters, harvest spirits, saints, and even ancestors. Understanding these archetypes helps explain why a small spiced figure could cross cultures and centuries without losing its appeal. One of the oldest archetypes embedded in the cookie is the trickster who escapes. In West African stories it might be Anansi the spider. In Native American myths it could be Coyote. In Scandinavian sagas, Loki slips bonds and shapeshifts his way out of trouble. These figures embody wit, vitality, and resilience. They break rules not to destroy but to renew. When a gingerbread man leaps from an oven and taunts his pursuers, he is echoing this archetype, a life force that refuses to be contained. To children it's funny. To adults, it's a reminder of the unstoppable energy of creation itself. Another archetype woven into the gingerbread tradition is the harvest spirit. In pre-Christian Europe, communities often imagined their crops as a living being. At the end of harvest, a symbolic figure, the last sheaf of grain, a corn doll, a bread effigy, embodied the spirit of fertility and needed to be treated with care. Sometimes it was hidden in a neighbor's field, sometimes it was brought to a feast and eaten to internalize the spirit for the next planting season. The gingerbread man's flight and eventual consumption mirror this ritual cycle. The spirit flees, is caught, and is shared, ensuring renewal. There is also the edible ancestor. In some ancient funerary customs, families baked small loaves shaped like their dead to place on graves or eat at commemorative meals. This was not cannibalism but communion, a way of reaffirming kinship and continuity. In medieval Europe, soul cakes served a similar purpose. Although the gingerbread man as we know him is playful rather than solemn, he still carries a trace of this idea. A human-shaped food that connects eaters to those who came before. When Christianity spread, these archetypes were reframed through saints and holy figures. Bakers molded gingerbread into likenesses of patron saints for feast days. Pilgrims bought spiced cakes stamped with crosses or portraits of holy men and women. Eating them was a minor act of devotion, a way to take the saint's blessing inside you. Over time, the religious imagery softened back into folk forms, knights, ladies, animals. But the basic practice remained, shaping a story in dough, giving it a face, then sharing it. The fox in the later children's tale also has a pedigree. In medieval bestiaries and fables, the fox represents cunning and transformative wisdom. He is the one who can catch what no one else can. In older versions of the runaway cake stories, the predator might be a wolf, a bear, or even the devil, depending on local beliefs. But the fox became the standard, perhaps because he was small enough to match the cookie and sly enough to make the ending feel like a lesson rather than a tragedy. The fox doesn't destroy the gingerbread man out of malice but out of cleverness, closing the ritual chase with a twist. Decorations on gingerbread figures also reveal archetypes. The buttons, stripes, and icing patterns we treat as mere embellishment once carried symbolic weight. 3 buttons might echo the protective power of the number 3. Zigzags could represent lightning or rivers. Dots might mimic seeds. In some regions, bakers pressed metal studs, paper flags, or even tiny mirrors into their figures, believing these additions amplified the charm. When children today add candy eyes or gumdrop hearts, they unknowingly participate in this tradition of activating the figure with symbols. Across continents we find similar archetypes embedded in edible figures. In China's mooncakes, the rabbit on the crust references the moon's immortal companion. In Mexico's Day of the Dead, sugar skulls embody playful ancestors. In Eastern Europe's honeycakes, shaped like birds or deer, protect homes and flocks. The gingerbread man stands in this company, a small, sweet mask of something larger. The human urge to give form to forces we feel but can't see. There is also a psychological dimension. Developmental psychologists note that children often project life onto inanimate objects. Dolls, toys, even food. A cookie shaped like a person invites a moment of identification. You decorate it, you name it, you imagine it running away. This moment of pretend play before eating mirrors ancient rituals in which the effigy was alive for a time. The archetype at work here is the temporary being, created, animated, consumed, a safe rehearsal for the impermanence of life. The gingerbread man's grin, then, is not just decoration. It's an archetypal mask, part trickster, part spirit of the harvest, part edible ancestor, part playful toy. It lets different cultures and ages project their own meanings onto the same simple shape. That flexibility is why the figure survived while more specific effigies faded. A cookie shaped like a saint belongs to one religion. A cookie shaped like a running person belongs to everyone. Over centuries, these archetypes blended. By the time of the first printed gingerbread boy tale in 1875, the cookie was already a composite. A spiced bread from the East, a runaway cake from northern folk tales, a ritual effigy from agrarian Europe, a decorated festival treat from medieval fairs. The story attached to it, escape, chase, clever capture, distilled all those archetypes into one easily told narrative. That narrative in turn reinforced the cookie's popularity, creating a feedback loop between myth and meal. Even today, marketers and bakers unconsciously draw on these archetypes. Holiday gingerbread men appear not only at Christmas but in Halloween costumes, Valentine's Day heart shapes, and collectible figurines. Animated films and commercials depict gingerbread characters as cheeky, indestructible tricksters, from fairy tale send-ups to video game mascots. Each new version refreshes the archetype for a new audience while keeping the core intact. Small, sweet, human-shaped, full of life, somehow escaping the ordinary. When you look closely, the gingerbread man is less a single character than a stage on which universal themes perform. Creation and escape, sharing and renewal, cunning and consequence. Each bite is a microstory that has been rehearsed for thousands of years. The cookie you hold is at once a child's treat, a saint's token, a harvest charm, and a trickster mask. In the fading light of a northern winter, when the frost creeps along the edges of every window, a village gathers for its mid-season feast. The year is somewhere in the late Middle Ages, but the customs they practice are much older than the church that towers over their square. At the heart of the celebration stands a wooden table covered in shapes of dough. Goats, birds, little children, and a row of small running men cut from spiced honey bread. The baker's apprentice dusts them with ginger, cinnamon, and a trace of clove. A handful of villagers hum a tune that sounds like a lullaby but carries the rhythm of a chase. As the bread bakes, the story unfolds, not on parchment but in living performance. A masked villager, playing the spirit of the year, dashes between houses, scattering handfuls of grain. Children run after him, laughing. In their pockets they carry miniature honey cakes shaped like the same fleeing figure. According to local tradition, the spirit must always escape until the final hour of the festival, when it willingly returns to be shared. A symbolic way of bringing the year's vitality back into the community. Everyone knows the story. No one writes it down. It's eaten instead. When the trays emerge from the oven, the little figures glow golden brown. Each has 2 dots for eyes and a curved slash for a mouth. The villagers don't call them gingerbread men. They call them loaf mansion, running little men, a name passed down from grandmothers who can't remember its origin. The children decorate them with dried berries and crushed nuts, chanting a rhyme. Run, little one, run through the snow. Bring back the sun, help our fields grow. They don't know that similar rhymes echo in Russian kitchens about the kolobok, or in Norwegian farms about the pancake boy. They just know that the act feels right. Shape the dough, sing the chant, chase the spirit, then eat the figure at dusk. Through this ritual they're rehearsing a myth older than their language. As dusk settles, The final scene plays out. The masked spirit of the year returns, carrying a bundle of straw. He kneels before the village elder, who breaks a large spiced loaf shaped like a running man and hands pieces to everyone. Only after this does the feast truly begin. Children nibble the limbs of their own cookies first, saving the head for last, a playful echo of the ritual's climax. The sweet heat of ginger warms their mouths. In that moment, the figure is no longer a toy but a charm they ingest, a small, edible promise of spring. Across Europe, countless variations of this mini-film unfolded each winter. In some towns, a gingerbread figure was hidden in a loaf, and whoever found it became the festival's runner for the next year. In others, couples exchanged gingerbread men and women as tokens of fertility. The details changed, a fox mask here, a wolf dance there, but the core remained, a spiced effigy that escapes, is chased, and then returns to be shared. The cookie and the story were inseparable. Each reinforced the other. Even in urban centers the same pattern appeared. In Nuremberg's winter market, a giant gingerbread man was paraded through the streets on a wooden board, accompanied by drummers. Children reached up to touch it for luck. Afterward, the figure was broken apart and sold in pieces to the crowd. In England, fairs featured gingerbread husbands and gingerbread wives sold to sweethearts. Buyers bit off the head first for luck, or saved it for last as a charm. Though merchants promoted these as novelties, they were carrying forward a ritual script written in dough. Folklorists call this ritual drama in edible form. Instead of watching a play on a stage, the community acts it out with food. The gingerbread man isn't just a snack. He's a prop, a participant, and a souvenir of the myth enacted. When later children's books turned this into a straightforward tale, the cookie running from the oven and meeting his fate with a fox, they were distilling an entire festival into a bedtime story. The details of the fox also appear in these older performances. In some villages, a man wearing a fox mask would chase the children, who clutched their cookies. If he caught them, he demanded a bite. This playful reversal of predator and prey made the ritual memorable and safe. By turning fear into laughter, the community taught children about danger, generosity, and the cycle of seasons without sermons. The fox mask, like the cookie, was a teaching tool dressed as fun. The sensory details, the heat of the oven, the sting of spice in the nose, the crunch of snow underfoot, were part of the story. People didn't just hear the myth, they smelled and tasted it. In a world before books were common, this multisensory approach ensured the tradition endured. You might forget a moral told in words, but you don't forget the smell of ginger and the thrill of a chase ending in a warm treat. Some historians see these village rituals as the missing link between ancient temple offerings and modern holiday baking. In temples, you offered bread to the gods. In villages, you offered it to the spirit of the season. In both cases, the bread was shaped, spiced, and then consumed to seal the ritual. The gingerbread man, in this view, is a democratized relic, a sacred effigy made small, portable, and sweet enough for children. What makes this mini-film so striking is how naturally it flows into today's traditions. Even now, families gather at wintertime, cut shapes from spiced dough, and tell a story, sometimes aloud, sometimes just in the ritual of decorating. They may not chase a masked spirit through the snow, but they still enact creation, animation, and sharing. The cookie runs away in imagination, is caught by the oven timer, and is shared at the table. The myth survives not because anyone insists on it, but because the ritual is enjoyable. When you picture that medieval village, the oven's glow, the fox mask, the children chanting, you're seeing the gingerbread man's secret heart. He is not a solitary invention, but a role in a very old play. His flight and capture are not random plot points but ritual beats in a cycle of renewal. His spices are not mere flavor but a whisper of distant trade winds. His smile is the mask of a life force that keeps running, century after century, right into your kitchen. If the gingerbread man's tale seems universal, that's because it is part of a whole constellation of runaway food legends spread across continents. Each culture dressed the same archetype in its own ingredients, spices, and symbols. Looking at these variations is like holding up a prism. The same beam of myth refracts into different colors. In the snowbound villages of Russia, the kolobok rolls rather than runs. He is a small round bun baked by an old couple longing for a child. Placed on a windowsill to cool, he springs to life, singing a song of freedom as he escapes. Along his path he meets a hare, a wolf, a bear. Each wants to eat him, each is outwitted. Finally, a fox coaxes him close with flattery and devours him. Children laugh at his boasts, chant his refrain, and learn a gentle warning about pride and trust. Though no ginger is involved, the pattern, creation, escape, clever capture, is unmistakably the same. In Norway and Sweden, the hero is a pancake that flips itself from the pan and rolls out the door. It too meets animals and people, repeating a rhythmic chant as it escapes. Scholars note that the Scandinavian versions emphasize household thrift. A bit of batter too small for a loaf becomes a lively character. These tales were told on winter nights, sometimes with real pancakes rolled across the table for children to catch, echoing the ritual chase of older bread effigies. In Germany, before the printed Gingerbread Boy, children heard of Der Fliegende Kuchen, the flying cake, or Das Lebkuchen Mansion, the little man of spiced cake. Some regional fairs staged puppet plays where a small bread figure danced on strings, taunting its pursuers. Afterward, children received cookies shaped like the character, uniting performance and treat. This fusion of story and snack created a feedback loop. The tale sold the cookie, and the cookie kept the tale alive. Across the Atlantic, immigrants carried these motifs to the New World. In 1875, a Massachusetts newspaper published the now famous Gingerbread Boy story. It had the same bones as Kolobok and Pancake but added a snappier refrain. Run, run as fast as you can, and a distinct name. The American version quickly appeared in children's readers and chapbooks, cementing Gingerbread Man as the default label for the archetype. Within a generation, the story and the cookie were inseparable at Christmas fairs and schoolrooms. Other cultures have their own edible fugitives. In parts of West Africa, trickster Anansi sometimes appears as a loaf or yam that moves on its own. In Japan's Edo period, traveling storytellers told of rice cakes that jumped from the hearth, a humorous nod to machi's sticky resilience. In Latin America, tamales are occasionally personified in folk songs as escaping their wrappers to dance. Though not always literal runaway food stories, these motifs show the same playful impulse: to animate what you eat, to imagine it has a will of its own before you consume it. Regional variations also appear in the cookies themselves. In the Netherlands, speculas, spiced biscuits baked in carved molds, feature windmills, ships, saints, and animals. At Sinterklaas time, children receive small spiced figures called kruidniten. In Poland, honey cakes called pierniki once bore imprints of knights, angels, and local symbols. In Hungary, bakers made mezeskalaks hearts decorated with mirrors, a courtship gift echoing the fertility tokens of old. Each of these treats carries a local story, yet all share the same grammar: spice, shape, meaning. Even within the English-speaking world, the figure morphed. In some Victorian households, gingerbread men became gingerbread husbands or wives, given as love tokens. In others, they were shaped like guards, animals, or children's initials. Street vendors at fairs sold gingerbread babies in cradles, playing on maternal instincts. The cookie was a blank canvas for social archetypes, absorbing whatever the moment demanded while retaining its core, a spiced effigy ready to run. Looking across these examples, a pattern emerges. The myth migrates not as a fixed story but as a structure. A created being escapes, meets challenges, is eventually taken back. The food medium changes: bun, pancake, cake, cookie, but the ritual logic stays. It is a way for communities to enact the cycle of life and consumption with humor rather than fear. By laughing at the runaway food and then eating it, people rehearse letting go of what they love and trusting in renewal. Trade routes knit these variations together. Ginger from Asia, cinnamon from Sri Lanka, cloves from the Moluccas, all traveled to Europe's ports, where bakers blended them into local doughs. Wooden molds carved with old symbols crossed borders in merchants' carts. Immigrants carried recipes and stories to new lands. Each stop added a new accent, a new ingredient, a new verse to the runaway effigy song. The result is a cookie that feels both local and universal, familiar and exotic, playful and profound. Even the fox at the end of the tale varies. In Russian and German versions, he may be a wolf or a bear. In some Scandinavian tellings, the pancake simply escapes forever, rolling off into the woods. In certain American retellings, the gingerbread man is saved or turns into something else. These differences matter less than the shared heartbeat of the story. Creation, animation, escape, encounter, return. That heartbeat is what keeps the figure alive, long after the festival ends or the cookie crumbles. Today you can see these variations side by side at international Christmas markets. A stall from Poland sells intricately iced honey nights. A Dutch vendor offers speculas windmills. A German baker displays Lebkuchen men with sly grins. An American tourist buys a cookie shaped like a running child and thinks of a bedtime story. None of them realize they're participating in a single ancient ritual that has been changing clothes but not identity for 3,000 years. This diversity of versions is part of the gingerbread man's secret. Because he is not tied to one fixed story, he can absorb many. Because he is not tied to one fixed form, he can travel anywhere. He is a runaway in myth and in history, always escaping the limits of one culture, always showing up in another with a smile and a hint of spice. If the gingerbread man's tale is the melody, then the decorations and details are its harmony. Every button, stripe, and curve carries echoes of older symbols that once spoke directly to people about nature, protection, and belonging. Looking at those marks is like reading a forgotten language in sugar and spice. Numbers come first. 3 buttons down the front of a cookie, 2 dots for eyes, a line for a mouth. These are not arbitrary. In pre-Christian Europe, the number 3 signified balance and protection. Past, present, future. Birth, life, death, earth, sky, water. When bakers pressed 3 berries or 3 nuts into a figure's chest, they weren't just decorating. They were sealing the effigy. Even today, many gingerbread cutters have 3 button impressions built in, a fossil of that old numerology. The outline of the running person also carries meaning. Early molds show exaggerated arms and legs, sometimes splayed as if mid-stride. Movement was a protective sign. A spirit that runs cannot be caught by misfortune. Children who ate the cookie took in its agility. Some guild molds even carved little swirls behind the figure's feet, like wind, turning the cookie into a charm of swiftness. Animal motifs around the gingerbread man link him to nature. Goats appear frequently in Scandinavian peppercaker, tied to the Yule goat who brings fertility. Birds mark migration and the soul's journey. Stamping a bird above a running man signaled safe travel. In some Polish molds, a tiny fox lurks at the edge, a visual punchline reminding the buyer of the story's inevitable twist. These creatures formed a kind of edible bestiary. To bite them was to symbolically take on their qualities. Spices themselves were symbols. Ginger signified warmth and courage. Cinnamon faithfulness, cloves endurance. Honey, the base of most early gingerbreads, meant purity and preservation. A honey spice cake shaped like a person was, in effect, a bundle of virtues you could share. When Queen Elizabeth I gave visiting nobles gingerbread likenesses of themselves, she was offering not only a playful portrait but a blessing of these qualities wrapped in luxury. Color carried meaning as well. Before icing sugar was common, bakers used natural tints. Saffron for gold, beet for red, spinach for green. Gold indicated the sun's return, red warded off illness, green called fertility. When modern bakers pipe white icing onto brown cookies, they're unconsciously echoing the old contrast of light and dark, winter and returning light, that framed the midwinter festivals where these cookies first appeared. Shapes of decoration tell their own story. Zigzags along arms and legs may look like simple cuffs but once symbolized lightning or flowing water, forces that renew. Dots along the edge echoed seeds, a silent wish for good harvest. Tiny mirrors glued onto Hungarian honey hearts were not vanity but a folk belief that reflective surfaces repelled envy and evil spirits. Even the gumdrop heart on a modern cookie is a softened form of the fertility token once pressed into a bride's bread. The act of decorating was itself ritual. In some households, children were not allowed to ice the cookies until they had recited a rhyme. In others, they had to place the buttons in a certain order: top, middle, bottom. These small gestures taught patience and sequence, embedding the rhythm of the myth into muscle memory. Decorating was not just fun. It was participation in the making of a temporary being. You gave it eyes so it could see, buttons so it could travel, a mouth so it could speak, before you ate it. Even the cookie's smell is symbolic. The warm, sweet, sharp scent of ginger and cinnamon rising from the oven was a sensory signal of safety. In cold climates, it meant heat and abundance. In crowded towns, it meant celebration instead of hunger. That aroma still acts as a cultural trigger today. Supermarkets pump it through holiday aisles. Coffee shops roll out gingerbread lattes. Without realizing it, modern businesses are activating a 3,000-year-old association. Spice equals comfort equals story. Symbols extend to the settings where gingerbread appears. Markets and fairs once lined their stalls with decorated hearts, stars, and men. Buyers wore them pinned to coats before eating them. This public display turned cookies into moving amulets, a festival of edible symbols circulating through the crowd. Even now, at European Christmas markets, you see heart-shaped gingerbreads with messages written in icing. People photograph them before they eat them, a digital echo of the old habit of wearing before consuming. Cross-cultural comparisons show the same grammar. Chinese mooncakes stamped with rabbits, Mexican sugar skulls painted with flowers, Greek vassilopita cakes with hidden coins. All are edible texts of protection, fortune, or remembrance. The gingerbread man belongs to this global language. His simple shape makes him easy to read, even when you don't know the alphabet. Understanding these symbols deepens the cookie's charm. That smile may once have been a protective curve. Those 3 buttons a triad of virtues. That running pose a charm for safe journeys. When you break a limb off a gingerbread man today, you're not just snacking. You're performing a faint echo of a ritual meal, internalizing agility, warmth, and luck. In modern kitchens, families often invent their own symbols without knowing it. A child adds a rainbow of candies, a parent pipes initials, a grandparent uses an old cutter. Each gesture layers new meaning onto the old. This adaptability is why the gingerbread man survived while other edible effigies vanished. You can dress him as a soldier, a snowman, a superhero. He still carries the ancient grammar of shape, spice, and story. Symbols also explain the cookie's seasonal timing. Winter festivals everywhere cluster around the solstice, when daylight is shortest and people long for warmth and return. A spiced human-shaped cookie eaten at this moment is more than dessert. It is a small enactment of survival and renewal. The running pose, the warm spice, the shared bite, each is a symbolic answer to the cold and the dark. When you next hold a gingerbread man, look closely at the details before you eat. You're reading a story carved in dough. Numbers, animals, lines, colors, scents. Each element is a whisper from bakers and storytellers long gone. Each bite is a page in an edible book that has been passed hand to hand, oven to oven, century to century. Walk into any supermarket in December and you'll see him smiling back at you from boxes of cookies, candles, and coffee cups. The gingerbread man has become so common a symbol of winter that most people never question how a tiny spiced figure leapt from old kitchens into global pop culture. Yet this jump is just the latest chapter in his long tradition of escaping boundaries. From ritual to treat, from treat to story, and from story to icon. In language, his footprint is subtle but present. Phrases like "run as fast as you can" and "you can't catch me" echo far beyond the children's tale. They appear in sports slogans, advertising taglines, and song lyrics. Journalists call elusive criminals gingerbread men or describe fleeting economic trends as runaway cookies. Playful shorthand that carries a faint trace of the archetype. The one who slips away just as you reach for it. Even people who have never read the original folktale recognize the cadence. It feels embedded in the culture. Holidays cemented his modern identity. In the 19th century, as Christmas became a family-centered celebration in Europe and North America, gingerbread houses and men migrated from fairs to home kitchens. Illustrated magazines printed recipes and patterns, turning what had been a regional specialty into a mainstream pastime. By the early 20th century, American cookbooks listed gingerbread men as standard Christmas fare, and children's storybooks reinforced the association. The cookie had completed its transformation from seasonal charm to holiday staple. The gingerbread house, though often presented as a German invention linked to the Brothers Grimm, also carries older echoes. Medieval bakers already constructed elaborate spiced cake shrines for fairs, sometimes with human figures at the doors. When the Grimms published Hansel and Gretel, a story about children, a forest, and a house of sweets, The image fused with gingerbread, and people began making edible houses at Christmas. Inside many early houses were small gingerbread people, as if the old effigies had found a new stage. Today, kits sold worldwide invite families to build their own miniature spice temples, unknowingly reenacting a ritual of shaping, decorating, and consuming that once honored gods and seasons. Pop culture gave the Gingerbread Man a second wind at the turn of the 21st century. In animated films, commercials, and video games, he appears as a cheeky, indestructible character. The Shrek movies turned him into a squeaky-voiced hero who survives torture and rallies his cookie comrades, a modern trickster laughing at danger. Mobile games feature endless-running gingerbread characters dashing across digital landscapes, echoing the old refrain of run as fast as you can, in touchscreen form. Each adaptation refreshes the archetype for a new generation, keeping the core, speed, escape, wit, while changing the scenery. Merchandise extends his reach. Plush gingerbread men, ornaments, costumes, and emojis circulate each winter. Bakeries sell vegan, gluten-free, or protein-packed versions, showing how easily the figure adapts to new values while staying recognizable. Even in countries without a gingerbread tradition, the image appears on packaging during Western-style holiday promotions. He has become a global seasonal mascot, a smiling stand-in for warmth and nostalgia. Yet traces of the old symbolism persist under the marketing gloss. The pose is still running. The buttons are still 3. The smile still invites you to take part in a story rather than just eat a cookie. Children still decorate their figures with faces before biting them, a ritual animation echoing ancient practices. Families still gather around ovens at the darkest time of year, filling their homes with spice and shaping small beings they will later share. The myth has not died. It has simply put on a sweater and stepped into a shopping mall. Even the house-building tradition contains hidden echoes of communal ritual. Assembling walls, piping icing, placing figures at the door. These are cooperative acts that bind participants together. Anthropologists studying holiday practices note that building gingerbread houses functions as a small festival within the household, reinforcing bonds through shared labor and aesthetic play. When the house is finally broken and eaten, the moment mirrors the old festivals where a communal loaf or effigy was divided to ensure renewal. Children may not know this, but they feel it in the fun. Cultural crossovers continue to give the Gingerbread Man new life. In Japan, he appears in seasonal convenience store pastries. In Mexico, bakers shape pan de jengibre into whimsical figures for Christmas. In digital art communities, he shows up as a meme, sometimes running from tax season, sometimes escaping 2020. Each appearance adds a layer to his runaway identity. Unlike other holiday icons locked into fixed forms, he thrives on reinvention. Museums and food historians have begun to recognize his depth. Exhibitions on gingerbread molds display centuries of carved scenes, from saints to foxes to wild beasts, showing how the cookie once held whole stories in relief. Cultural commentators trace how the runaway food tale mirrors migration narratives and the human wish for freedom. Even marketing studies cite the Gingerbread Man as a case of mythic branding, a character whose roots are so deep that new contexts feel instantly authentic. And still, at the center of all this, is the simplest ritual: shaping, spicing, decorating, sharing. In a world of digital screens and rapid change, that act reconnects people to something tactile and communal. You roll the dough, press the cutter, smell the ginger, draw a smile. For a moment you are not just making a snack but taking part in a 3,000-year-old dialogue between myth and meal. The Gingerbread Man escapes his oven again, this time into your kitchen, and you become part of the chase. This endurance explains his power as a cultural touchstone. He can appear in a blockbuster film, on a smartphone screen, or in a grandmother's kitchen and still feel right. He carries no doctrine, no exclusive claim, only the archetype of the lively little being who runs and returns. That openness makes him a perfect vessel for both nostalgia and novelty. Like the spices he contains, he warms whatever context he enters. Looking at the Gingerbread Man through a scientific lens reveals not just a quaint holiday tradition but a living example of how human culture encodes meaning in everyday acts. Anthropologists, food historians, and psychologists have all studied why certain edible rituals survive across millennia. Their findings show that our spiced little runner is more than a cookie. He is a case study in how myth, memory, and behavior intertwine. Anthropology begins with function. In agrarian societies, festivals were not separate from survival. They marked sowing, harvest, and the turning of seasons. Edible effigies like honey cakes or bread figures served as offerings and teaching tools. Shaping dough into beings provided a tactile way to transmit stories and values without literacy. Children could participate by molding or decorating, learning both recipe and ritual simultaneously. In this view, the Gingerbread Man is a miniature textbook of communal life, a hands-on myth that anyone could read. Food historians trace the movement of ingredients and recipes. Ginger, cinnamon, and cloves traveled thousands of miles from Southeast Asia to the Middle East to Europe. Wooden molds, spice blends, and baking techniques moved along the same routes. Each migration layered new meanings onto old practices. By following trade records and archaeological finds, historians show how a Sumerian honey cake and a Nuremberg Lebkuchen share a family tree. The Gingerbread Man thus becomes a delicious map of globalization long before the term existed. Psychology explains why we still respond to him. Humans have a built-in tendency to anthropomorphize, to see faces and agency in objects. This tendency helps children learn empathy but also makes them delight in toys, dolls, and yes, cookies shaped like people. When you give a cookie eyes and a smile, you activate a small part of your social brain. You feel a flicker of connection before eating it. Researchers call this the cute then consume paradox. It makes the treat more memorable and the ritual more emotionally engaging. Memory science adds another layer. Smell and taste are powerful triggers of long-term memory. The scent of ginger or cinnamon can instantly transport someone back to childhood kitchens. Because our olfactory system connects directly to the brain's emotional centers, spiced cookies create vivid, positive memories that reinforce tradition. Even when families forget the original story, the aroma acts as a retrieval cue, reviving the ritual automatically. This is why a gingerbread man can feel comforting even to someone who never heard the folktale. The sensory signature is enough. Cognitive science also notes the power of scripts, repeated sequences of action that structure behavior. Rolling dough, cutting shapes, decorating, baking, sharing. This is a ritual script. Each step builds anticipation and rewards. Shared scripts strengthen social bonds because everyone knows the moves. Over generations, these scripts persist even if their explicit meanings fade. The Gingerbread Man script, create, animate, chase, consume, mirrors deep cognitive patterns of cause and effect, pursuit and outcome. It is satisfying because it fits our mental template for a good story. Historians of religion see the Gingerbread Man as part of a larger category. Edible symbols. Bread and wine in Christian communion, sugar skulls in Dia de los Muertos, mooncakes at Mid-Autumn Festival. Each combines nourishment, story, and identity. Eating the symbol is not just consumption but participation. This embodied experience anchors beliefs and traditions more deeply than words alone. Even when belief shifts, the embodied act can continue as culture. The Gingerbread Man is a survivor of such a shift, a folk communion distilled to sweetness. From a sociological perspective, the cookie also functions as a ritual of belonging. Families who bake together enact cooperation and transmission of values. Communities that sell or exchange gingerbread figures enact trust and reciprocity. Even strangers at a market stall share a brief connection through the purchase of a smiling effigy. In an age of fragmented digital interactions, this simple act of shaping and sharing becomes a rare moment of tactile communal meaning. Some scholars link the runaway food motif to cognitive development in children. These stories combine humor, repetition, and mild suspense, which are ideal for teaching cause and consequence. The protagonist's refrain, "You can't catch me," invites call-and-response participation, reinforcing memory and language. The inevitable capture by a fox or other predator provides a gentle lesson in limits. No one escapes entirely, but wrapped in a safe, edible metaphor. The cookie that runs but is eaten becomes a playful rehearsal for life's impermanence. Evolutionary psychology adds one more insight: spice as signal. For most of human history, spices were rare, expensive, and sometimes antimicrobial. Offering a spiced treat signaled generosity, status, and care. Shaping it into a person amplified the gesture, You weren't just giving food, you were giving a token of vitality. This made spiced effigies powerful gifts at courtship, betrothal, or alliance. Modern gingerbread hearts at fairs still echo this courtship function, though we now see them as quaint souvenirs. Put all these strands together and the gingerbread man emerges as a perfect storm of cultural persistence. He satisfies our sensory brains with smell and taste. He engages our social brains with a face and story. He fits our cognitive scripts of creation, escape, and return. He adapts to new ingredients, new values, new media. And he appears at a time of year when people most crave warmth, nostalgia, and connection. No wonder he keeps running. Science can explain these mechanisms, but it also highlights the mystery. Why do some rituals vanish while others endure? Why this cookie and not another? Part of the answer may be his archetypal flexibility. He is not tied to one dogma or festival. He can be pagan, Christian, secular, playful, or digital. He can be a child's snack, a lover's token, a marketing mascot, or an anthropologist's field note. In every role he carries the same essential gesture. Here is life in dough, escaping and returning. This is the 3,000-year-old secret in plain sight. Not a hidden recipe but a pattern of human behavior. Shaping stories into food so they can be shared, remembered, and renewed. Every time you roll dough and cut a running figure you participate in that pattern. Every time a child chants a runaway cookie rhyme, the myth runs another lap through history. And every time you bite into the smiling cookie, you complete a cycle as old as agriculture. When you hold a gingerbread man in your hand, you're holding a thread that stretches back 3,000 years. It is easy to think of it as a quaint cookie, a seasonal decoration, a bit of nostalgia. Yet every detail, the running pose, the 3 buttons, the scent of spice, is a trace of human beings trying to make sense of the seasons, of life and loss, of renewal and sharing. The little spiced figure has outrun empires and oceans not because of a secret ingredient but because it embodies a pattern older than writing. Creating something alive, letting it escape, bringing it back, and sharing it with the community. Across this journey we've seen how ancient temple kitchens shaped honey cakes into gods and spirits, how medieval villagers acted out a ritual chase with spiced effigies, how immigrants carried runaway food stories across continents, how modern families build gingerbread houses and decorate smiling cookies. At each stage the figure adapted without losing its core. It could be pagan, Christian, secular, or digital. It could run in a folktale on a festival street, or across a smartphone screen. It could be eaten as a charm or as a snack. Yet always it kept moving, the little archetype who never stays in one place. This is why his smile feels different from a simple treat. It is an invitation to participate in an ancient conversation. When a child pipes icing eyes on a cookie and says, "Run, run," they are not just playing. They are rehearsing a ritual their ancestors once performed with songs and masks. When an adult breaks a gingerbread heart at a market and shares it with a friend, they are echoing the old custom of dividing the effigy to renew bonds. When families build and then break a gingerbread house, they are acting out a cycle of creation and release that once honored gods and seasons. Without knowing it, they keep the myth alive. Science helps us see how this works. Smell and taste trigger memory. Anthropomorphism invites empathy. Repeated scripts strengthen tradition. But there is something beyond mechanism. In shaping and sharing a spiced figure, we touch the continuity of culture. We turn the abstract, the passing of time, the hope for renewal, into something we can smell, touch, and taste. That is why the gingerbread man endures when so many rituals fade. He gives form to what is fleeting. He makes impermanence sweet. There is also a quiet lesson in his story. The gingerbread man always boasts, always runs, always meets a clever fox. He is never immortal, but he is always reborn in the next batch of dough. In that sense he teaches resilience rather than escape. You may be caught, but you return. The cycle continues. Shared food becomes shared story, becomes shared memory. In a fragmented world, this small ritual of spice and shape still offers a moment of belonging. Next time you roll out dough, pause for a moment before you cut the shape. You're not just baking. You're participating in one of humanity's oldest arts, weaving story into food so it can be carried, remembered, and renewed. The little figure you cut will leap from your oven into a tradition that began when bread was sacred and stories were eaten as well as told. That is the gingerbread man's real secret. Not hidden in a recipe but hidden in plain sight, running through time, inviting you to join the chase. And when you take that first bite, you are not ending the story but completing it. You become part of the ritual that has moved from temple to village to kitchen, from myth to cookie, from ancestor to child. You take in warmth, memory, and a dash of the trickster's grin. For a moment, across centuries, you hold in your hands not just a cookie but a living piece of human imagination. A small, spiced messenger reminding you that some stories are meant to be tasted, not just told.